Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Studio 666. So, I was able to watch this film because I conveniently was to go on an app called Fox HD Movies. I went on, and if you go and Google search this app, you'll find a logo that'll say Fox HD Movies, but a title that'll say like Play 1080p HD movies and whatever. And you should be able to see a pretty good version of this film. It's not like a theater variation. So that was good. There might eventually be some like premium access for this movie. I'm not quite sure. Really, I would probably go on and check like Voodoo's or Amazon's or something like that to eventually see this film at some point, unless you want to go into a theater. I would actually say that this movie is fun enough to go into a theater and watch it. I would say this movie is actually a great film. Really, a lot of people would be like, "Well, is it a really like scary film?" I think for the most part, I couldn't help but laugh a lot through this film. I thought it was really funny. I thought it was really good. I really enjoyed it. And for those of you who may or may not be Foo Fighters fans, you may go on and just enjoy this either way. Because really, like, we have for like Foo Fighters fans, they kind of bring up some kind of funny things, especially when this movie is to focus upon these characters trying to write a brand new album. And so, from hearing some interviews that Dave Grohl was to have, he was to have kind of been with his bandmates, and they were just kind of coming up with this idea for this movie, and really they thought it was possibly going to be like their next music video or like something along those lines. And all of a sudden, like, when these guys started having this idea, it all of a sudden turned into like, well, hey, like, how about instead of just some kind of music video or something, how about we just make a movie out of this? And they're like, oh, okay, well, like, sure, like, as long as it's the easiest thing as possible. And then all of a sudden, like, the wheels started turning and money started flowing, and then it just became this thing that just really legitimately became a real movie that, like, these guys weren't thinking were going to be, like, a real legit thing. They were just thinking, like, oh, we'll just make something fun. And it really turned into a legit thing, so it's kind of funny. So, because, yeah, like, the whole thing is, like, I would probably avoid going into any interviews that Dave Grohl is to do about this film because I honestly went and saw an interview that Dave Grohl was doing about this movie, and he basically tells you exactly how the film is to break down. And I would have liked to have not have seen an interview that says exactly what this movie does. But oh well, you can kind of figure it out via the concepts. You can kind of figure out how the movie goes. But yeah, so like, come to this movie if you're gonna go into it with laughs rather than you being scared. There actually is some decent scare parts in this movie. Um, but yeah, I felt that this movie has some like Evil Dead kind of things with it, much more so than anything else. Like, immediately, like, when I was thinking about this movie, I'm like, this kind of feels like the first Evil Dead, or possibly like gives you kind of Conjuring vibes if you're gonna go in that direction. So you can kind of figure out what this movie is really about by me saying kind of other films that this kind of is to be similar to. So yeah, so I would say, yeah, definitely a great film. Go ahead and check it out if you can conveniently. Go on to make a Google search and Fox HD HD movies. Logo will say so. Title will say something different. Play 1080p HD movies, whichever. Go ahead and find that app and dare in fact, or you can go into Possibly eventually apps like Letter C Movies. You can go on and Google search that. So it's a letter and then a word. More than likely, they'll probably have some kind of access for this somewhere eventually, and eventually rent it conveniently at home, watch it, whatever, do whatever you want. So, uh, teeing it up, what is this movie about? Really, the movie is fairly simple. We have a number of people that are to need to make a new album, so they go to this one kind of secluded area to do so, and all of a sudden that leads to us finding out that this home is to have a haunted past. Of course, with a music band of sorts that was to try and go on and make music at this same location. And oddly enough, they all slowly but surely all died. To lead us to have the Foo Fighters to need something unique, some kind of Dungeons and Dragons and whatever, because Led Zeppelin was to go on and do their album at some castle somewhere. So the Foo Fighters decided to pick this location and to go on and consistently try to put together one song that seems to be far too long. Because we'll go in further and further, and I'll talk about the more details when we actually get into the spoilers. Hopefully, I'll be able to retain everything that I had just seen from this movie. It might be all over the place, but really, at the end of the day, go out of your way to watch this film. It's really good. I really enjoyed it. So, definitely a thumbs up movie. Come in and ready to laugh rather than to be scared is what I'll finish up saying here. So, already said it. Let's go on to that double five time territory. Let's just go into spoilers about this movie. Let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I get to spoil this movie. So, the very beginning of it, of course, is to have a woman who is dragging herself with her leg broken, to have this man coming at her with these shears, with this hammer and smashing her head, killing her. We find another person dead on the steps, and that's how this movie just kind of opens. So we have the Foo Fighters all in this conference room talking to the manager, who is Jeremy Schill. So Shill's kind of a funny name for a manager. So these guys are like, they're starting to talk before Shill comes in. The Foo Fighters start talking about either Dune, or they talk about Waterworld and how like great those two movies were. I have, I guess, reviewed the more recent Dune, but like I've never reviewed Waterworld. But hey, I guess if these guys like Waterworld, because maybe they like Kevin Costner, and we go on and have Dave Grohl talking about the gills that are on the back of the guy's ear, and they don't talk about like Dennis Hopper being in that film with the eye patch. And anyways, so I've seen both Waterworld and both Dunes. I like I like the original Dune more so than the remake. Sadly, maybe at some point they might remake Waterworld. I don't know. Anyways, we'll figure that out when it comes down to it. So, the fighters who foo. I remember that one Robot Chicken, like Mr. T sketch. I pity the Foo. Foo Fighters, hey Foo Fighters, come on in. The fighters of Foo. Anyways, so Foo Fighters are going on and talking about these movies, and all of a sudden Jeremy Schill comes in and be like, hey, it wasn't Sting and Dune? And they're like, yeah. It's like, well, hey, you know what Sting also does? He delivers albums. Like, when are you going to deliver me your next album? And they're like, well, yeah, gee golly, you know what? It's like, it's the 10th album. I don't know. It's going to be really hard to get this one out. We got to, like, get something really creative. We got to find a real creative spot Like, and I'm talking about like Led Zeppelin castles, and like we got to figure out some real like great place to go on and do this album. And so Jeremy Schill, of course, is talking to his assistant, who I guess is Barb Weems. And so Schill, of course, is saying to Weems, "It's like, well, yeah, you know probably the perfect spot for them, right?" And they're like, "Yeah, sure." So we transitions that we transition the fighters that flew to this location, and so this person is like, "Yeah, I figured out that this is the perfect spot for you guys." So all of a sudden, Dave Grohl kind of goes with the rest of the band, and Dave goes and he claps into the house, and he continues to just kind of clap. Every time he claps, there's some kind of disturbing imagery that kind of consistently shows. Dave is like, man, this seems like, I don't know what it is, but this kind of like, there's something about this that, like, it just seems perfect. So they take the place and they're like, okay, great. We have Weems who's mentioning that's like, well, hey, like this place is also really good for grilling. And Dave is like, yeah, like I'm perfect on the grill, isn't that right, guys? And of course, we have one of the members of the fighters that foo. Uh, Heaven forbid you actually get an easy freaking cast list here. Uh, really? Of course. One of the Foo Fighters. One of the Foo Fighters mentioned to Dave that it's like, you're not really good at the grill. Come on. So that's what happens when you don't have a picture upon cast list. It's annoying. So my apologies, person who is to say things of which that I'm going to go on and just. The guy's picture's right there. He doesn't know the Foo Fighters. I don't know them all by name, ironically. Sadly enough. Hence why I have a cast list. We have John Carpenter, who's actually in this movie, and I was like blown away by that. Because they like in the beginning credits, they have it in the beginning credits, and I was thinking like, oh well, John Carpenter is probably not actually going to be in this film. Surefire enough. We also have the guy in this movie, Jason Tross, who's the tech in this film. I remember seeing him in All Superheroes Must Die. I was like, okay, cool, he's in this film. Like, it took me a while to be like, why does that guy look so familiar? And then I put two and two together. So, whatever. So, the Foo Fighters go on, and they're realizing how great this place is. We have a bunch of tech guys who are all setting this up. We have, of course, a guy named Krug, who is to kind of realize that there's a lot of horrible wiring going on. And so we have Krug who goes on and puts this wire together. And all of a sudden we find out that this guy gets electrified. And so that leads to the first death of this film, with the exclusion of the person that got killed by the hammer. Because that was in the past. No, like, the past doesn't exist, because it's past. Anyways, so, what are you talking about? I don't know. Anyways, so, Krug is now dead, and so they're going on, and every single time somebody dies, they're immediately just like, well, I guess this is, like, over. Like, let's go on and let's just, kind of pack up and let's get out of here. And David Grohl's like, no, as if I have to say his whole name. And if I can freaking also say it right, Dave Grohl, my bad. Dave goes on and he mentions the band. He's like, no, now we need to dedicate this album to Krug. And so now we need to go on and we just gotta focus and just do this record. So Krug is electrified. They go and they haul him away with these paramedics. So we have Dave and all the rest of the band members all kind of sleeping. And so Dave is having these weird dreams. There's part about me that kind of like throughout this movie kind of has like also like the very original like Ghostbuster kind of vibes also. Especially when they kind of walk down, like when Dave kind of walks down those stairs, and also when Dave is being grabbed in this bed, it kind of like when you kind of think about it, it's kind of like Sigourney Weaver being grabbed by those hands and like kind of like the terror dog grabbing situation, and where she's like and she goes and is pushed into that doorway because she's like there is no Dana, only Zool. So and that's the only thing that I want to remember. Afterlife wasn't exactly the best uh, savor my flavor kind of film. Anyways, pushing on. So Dave is having this dream where, and he just kind of continues to have these like weird, goofy dreams. So Dave at one point, I think, is to be paranoid about this gardener. Consistently goes on and tries to follow this gardener, and it vanishes. And so, or the gardener vanishes. And so now Dave is dreaming about this gardener who is also in Dave's dream, as well as Krug, who is to appear as this ghost and is to like come at him at his bed. And Dave is being grabbed by all these demons. He's having all these like organs being pulled out of his stomach. Dave freaks out and he wakes up and he's like, "Oh, Krug!" And I thought that was a funny spot. We have Dave, who of course is to meet up with Whitney Cummings, who plays Samantha in this movie. And Dave, who meets up with her, is to ask Samantha, it's like, well, hey, like, is there a gardener that kind of works here? Like, does anybody kind of come around in this location? And Samantha's is like, no, Dave Grohl, no one has been here for a long time. Like she, like slowly but surely, like shrinks down and like is to have this like really creepy because she's like really friendly and she's like, hey guys, like I'm your nosy neighbor and I'm gonna go on and deliver you guys treats that are laced with cocaine. She's gonna give them like lemon wedges or whatever, and like she laces them with cocaine and they're like, oh, cocaine. And Dave's like, hey, like we gotta go on and do this album, like no distractions. Dave is like, I hate that woman. So we have Dave, who continues to just get frightened and is getting so paranoid that there's somebody like consistently working on this garden. I would just let the dude work away. Hey, sheer guy, just go on, just do your business. Like if you're a crazy dude, then F off, but whatever. So but Dave goes on and he is to like one night just start to hear the so he's going on and going through this house and he finds this like underground basement or something. And so we of course have Dave who goes on and is to find this place, and he realizes that there's a raccoon that had been sacrificed. Probably the grossest part of this movie, but there's going to be obviously some gross part of this film because we kind of see the like the raccoon organs just kind of hanging out, and that might disgust somebody. I don't. It is what it is. There is some really cool effects in this film. There's some stuff that even kind of feels a little bit like a Friday the 13th style kind of movie, because man, do they do some interesting kills in this movie. And that's kind of weird to say because you would think that everything would be done, but this movie does some interesting things. So Dave goes on and is to see this like old uh, kind of thing that is to kind of play this music, which of course you kind of like see here in this picture. And so Dave is to start to listen to it, and he hears a sound that he absolutely needs to make a song, because we find out that Dave is to have some really bad writer's block, or they call it like writer's constipation or whatever. So to the point where Dave is like getting the band together, and he's playing like some like things of his that have obviously been done before. They're like, hey, yeah, like that's Everlong, and that's like that's this song, and that's that, and that. Like, man, what are you doing? So Dave is like, yeah, I know, I'm really in writer's block right now. I think everything that I've ever sang has already been sung. Like, I don't know, I don't think I can come up with anything more. All of a sudden, Dave is going on this piano, and he's singing and playing the song "Hello" from Lionel Richie. I'm like, yeah, that's the one song to play, man. Yeah, because so Dave all of a sudden is like sing "Hello, is it me you're looking for?" All of a sudden, Lionel Richie appears out of nowhere and is like, "Hey man, don't take my song. That's my song. Don't take it." As he's like walking away. And I'm like, Lionel Richie just showed up in this movie. What the heck? Oh my god, this is crazy. So Lionel Richie leaves, and I'm like, what the fuck? But hey, good song choice though. So yeah, so Dave, after listening to this perfect song, and he's just like, yeah, yeah, and all of a sudden we have the perfect time where these shadow demons, as they're called in the IMDb, the shadow person, shadow demons, something or other. So they take hold upon Dave, and now Dave, of course, is to uh, be possessed by the gardener with his little hat and his garden persona. So once Dave leaves that room, all of a sudden Pat Mear is to be holding, or Smear? Pat. Pat is holding Doritos, and I'm wondering if that's a sponsor of this movie. So Pat drops the Doritos, and Dave is kind of crunch them as he leaves. So Dave is going on and like pulling everybody, he like waking everybody up. He's like, "Hey, I got a great idea." So we have these characters go, and we have Dave, who has had this kind of weird key. I guess it's like L flat or something, and like they can't figure it out. They're like, like, what about all the other keys? And he's like, no, L flat. You got to do it that way. You got to L flat, and it's like, like, and so because every single time everybody's to kind of play the right thing, it has to have this like weird, like spooky, like sound to it, where it's like, like. Okay, that's a weird. Anyways, so Dave is to kind of hit them with this whole like musical like thing within this guitar, and they're just like, oh my god, wow, that's some interesting stuff there. So they can't quite figure it out, but eventually, once they do, they start going and going and going with one song. to where it just continues to just escalate and escalate and escalate until they're wanting to figure out how to end the song, because they're just like, dude, this song is like 30 something minutes. Like, this song is 44 minutes. Come on. Like, figure out how to end it. Come on. Like, they don't even have like the lyrics of the song. It's just 44 minutes of and I'm just like, there's no lyrics to this song. But it is what it is. So we have it where Dave is just kind of like, he's trying to figure out what to do with this song. So instead of cooking on the grill, because at some point we have them cooking on the grill, and Dave is to see the spirit of Krug within this grill, and he's like, oh my god! He jumps back, and they're like, what? He's like, Krug was in the grill! Looking in the grill and not seeing anything. So Dave decides to go on and order some food. And so we have Will Forte, who is to be the restaurant delivery guy. And I'm like, well, it makes kind of a lot of sense to have Will Forte be this delivery guy, because when thinking about it, he was technically the voice for Shaggy in one of the Scooby-Doo animated things. More probably recent one. Anyways, so Will Forte goes, and he has these like this long black hair. It's weird. So Will Forte, as this restaurant delivery guy, delivers these orders of chicken parmesan to Dave, and Will's just like, oh my god, I'm a big fan, and hey, like, I'm in a band too. Hey, can I give you my demo? And Dave is just like, sure, as long as you can give me my extra thing of ranch. And Will's like, oh, I'll go back and I'll get more for you. So eventually what happens is, the second time around when Will Forte is to deliver these steak meals, as well as Will also like having his demo. It's like, hey, I have my demo for this band called Bone Structure. So Will is trying to deliver this food and the demo, and he's trying to figure out the perfect way to work in that he had this demo. All of a sudden, Will Forte's character is to be killed by this gardener with the shears and just stabbed. So, and I know the gardener actually legitimately has a name, which is said within this film, but heaven forbid IMDb actually lists it. Because heaven forbid, right? Heaven for frickin' bid. Yeah, nowhere within this movie do they list the name. You movie credit thing of IMDb, heaven forbid you do the legwork. Like I didn't do, because heaven forbid I remember and retain everything. Woe is me. Anyways, so the guys the very next day are just like, well, hey, like, did they ever deliver the food to us? They open the door to realize all the food is right in front of the door. And they're just like, well, hey, yeah, like, Dave was saying, it's like, well, maybe I scared him off before, because, like, I was just kind of like an a-hole to him or whatever. So, but they find out, like, as Dave is to realize that he's like, oh, there's ranch. You can never have enough ranch. Yeah. This movie is just so funny, but I'm not really doing it enough justice. It's funny. It's freaking hilarious. I loved it. But anyways, moving on. So, the Foo Fighters as themselves are to realize that Will Forte is to be dead off to the side. And we have Dave who goes all the way up to his body, and he's kind of like poking at things, and then he's like, oh, hey, he talked about a demo before. This must be it. Bone structure. So all of a sudden the band is like, okay, now we finally called it. Like, this is gonna be it. Like, we're definitely just gonna like call it wraps now. There's too many dead bodies here that have like people who have died at one point, and David's just like, no, like we can't just go on and just like we have to figure out how to just end the song. Once we end the song, then like you can call the police, you can call anybody, like figure this whole thing out, and Bob's your uncle, it'll all be over. So Dave is also telling everybody, it's like, well, hey, now I want everybody's cell phones and I want everybody's keys. And so they all hand it up to Dave. Uh, we had, of course, Taylor that was trying to call, and Dave is like grab the the phone from him, like crushes it. Dave is like, no, we can't call the cops. We can't call the cops yet. Everything is focused upon finishing this song. So we have Pat, who of course is talking to Barb, and Pat is to go on and start eating these lemon things, these lemon bars. All of a sudden, he notices something about the sacrifice, and Barb's like, "The sacrifice?" And Pat's like, "The sacrifice?" No. What if they kept just looping and just said the sacrifice? Anyways, so Dave comes in, and that all of a sudden just kind of leaves Pat to just kind of like, well, I'm going to mosey on out of here. Pat, a guy who kind of just falls asleep anywhere, and then he complains about like, well, hey, like I don't really have a bed here, but Pat like falls asleep everywhere in the film. So we have at one point where one of the guys, one of the band members, who is to kind of be very spiritual and is to go on and uh, start to spend a lot more time with Samantha's character, because at some point he just wants to bang her. So the more that the rest of the band kind of hangs out with Samantha, the more Samantha is wanting to tell them the truth about this place. That there was to be, of course, this guy who I call the gardener, uh, who at one point was to have this band, and he decided he wanted to be able to have like the perfect song, and he decided to sacrifice this raccoon so he could go on and find the perfect song. And after that, that is to start to lead to every one of these band members' deaths. So really, Samantha is gearing these guys up to try and find this book of evil and to thumb through the pages to find the perfect page to reverse this curse, because Dave is obviously possessed. So, because we, at some points, like, we start to see certain characters that are realizing that Dave is to have these kind of like fanged teeth, and like a lot of them are just kind of like, okay, like Dave is acting really weird. So we go on and start to have a number of people who are starting to get killed off here. So Taylor, the drummer, is to go on and meet with Dave to supposedly wrap up this song, as we had another band member who was getting so frustrated with Dave having this song go on too long that he started to grill hot dogs, and Dave came up from behind him and started knifing him and shoving his face in this grill, killing him off. So Taylor, I guess, is to be on deck. He's to be really the next guy to get killed because both Samantha and the other spiritual member of the Foo Fighters, they of course are going at it, maybe. And so while they're going on and doing that, we have Dave, uh, who is kind of gearing up this chainsaw under the bed, while there's to be this other song that has this kind of like chainsaw element weirdly into it. So Dave goes and saws both Samantha and the Foo Fighter member in half through this bed. And I was like, oh my god, this is like brutal, but like, man, is this kind of cool. Like, it's way better than the Kevin Bacon Friday the 13th, like, kind of arrow or whatever through the neck, and then he dies that way. A little bit better than that. Way better than that. So, both of them are in half and they kind of flop perfectly. I'm like, yeah, weirdly. So, we have the two other Foo Fighter members that are left, both Pat and, of course, the other guitarist. Heaven forbid that I know all the Foo Fighter members, and heaven forbid IMDb lists all of them. Like a son of a bitch. Anyways, so we push on in this movie, frustratingly. So we go on here, and the two guys are trying to read from this book as as Pat is to easily know where to go on because he had seen Dave going to this location before, so obviously the book must be in there. They go and he starts to scramble for this book, and some shadow spirits are trying to come after them. So they start looking and thumbing through this book as Taylor is to try and stall as much as possible, but Dave is telling Taylor, it's like, well, hey, like, you and me are drummers. Like, I know exactly what you need to do. Like, come on. Like, so Taylor, who is all blistered and whatever, and he is to go on and just go and do what Dave wants. And he goes on and finishes a song. And so now Dave is like, great. So Taylor is to stand up, and Dave is to get one of the percussion pieces, and the gold cymbal piece. I don't know exactly. I know percussion, but heaven forbid I actually know what exact piece that is. So he goes and slices Taylor's head in half, and then the rest of the body falls down. I'm like, oh my god, this visual looks so cool. And I'm like, of course you kind of kill like your drummer that way. It makes a lot of sense. So now Dave is just kind of waiting it out for his other members. So while he's doing that, we have all of a sudden other people who arrive. Or no, wait. Let's back up a little because I've gotten too ahead of myself. So Dave is starting to put body parts through this wood chipper, and so both of the two members that are left are realizing that, like, hey, we got to figure out what's going on in this book. And oh my god, Dave is starting to put body parts in this wood chipper. Oh my god, this is awful. So they go on and they start figuring it out that they have to go on and find a big body of water that they can create as like a holy water for Dave to forcibly go through or go into to kind of absolve him of this demonic possession. So I'm like, man, so like demonic possession, like you just dump a person in holy water and it works. It's kind of loose. But also, I just don't quite understand how like a wouldn't a priest have to just call that like holy? What I don't know. It just kind of, I guess, for the book purposes and the movie purposes, like you don't want to just ring in at a priest bizarrely. Anyways, moving on. So they go and they go and they do this uh this kind of seance and whatever. And so Dave all of a sudden is flying across this pool, and the book all of a sudden is to electrify Dave, pushing him into the pool, and so Dave ends up getting resolved, and all of his supposed spirits are to disappear, and all of a sudden once Dave gets out of this pool, he starts barfing, and he barfs up the gardener, and so all of a sudden we have the rest of the band members after David start punching this guy to a bloody pulp. All of a sudden, the other band members, the spirit of the band members, the Dream Widow band members, are all of a sudden to appear, and they're to take blood from this Gardner character, and they kind of pour it into the book, which kind of gets rid of everything. Dave and the rest of the band members go on and they walk off, all of a sudden to be greeted by Jeremy Schill and Barb Weems, who we find out are to be possibly working with the devil or whichever. So the Foo Fighter members who are left besides Dave are going on to try to start this car and get the heck out of there. Pat is doing a very weird way to start this car, but there's a whole reason for that, because he's going to get killed, sadly. Because what happens is the guy who's at the driver's seat is going to get something poked into his eye, and that all of a sudden is to kill Pat, because this guy is driving in reverse and is going to crush Pat's skull, killing him, and also when Bob Weems is making it to the back of this car, she gets hit also, but not hit enough to be instantly killed. The other Foo Fighter member in the driver's seat is coming out, realizing that he had hit this woman. The woman stabs what is to really just be left of the Foo Fighters. And so now Dave is fighting off with Schill. And the funny part about this fight is the one thing that kind of sticks out is these guys are just trading nut shots. And I thought that was hilarious. It's kind of like the one WWE wrestling match between Shinsuke Nakamura and AJ Styles, where they would just consistently just be trading nut shots back and forth. And I thought that was hilarious then, and seeing this, I thought it was hilarious now. Like, these guys are just trading off nut shots. And so, Schill convinces Dave that Dave has technically finished this song, and that Dave has never been Dave for a really long time now. And so, really, we're kind of thinking that possibly Dave Grohl is possibly the devil. And so Schill is kind of convincing him that Dave still has some evil within him, and that since he has finished the song anyways, like, that he should just kind of go on and start his own solo career. So the next thing we of course see is Dave at this concert that I guess is all packed and sold out and whatever. And so Dave is to be in a very dark voice. He is to be like holding this guitar, and you all of a sudden kind of look at him as he kind of like puts his head up, and his eyes are all blackened and all black veins are kind of going through his eyes, and we find out that he's a very much demoned character. So yeah, I guess this movie doesn't have any end credit scenes, no nothing. which I'm fine by that because I'm like, good. Like, no offense, like there's some movies that I think should just be fine without end credit scenes because I just don't get why we have to have end credit scenes for movies. Like, I think it's just like, hey, like give a person relief that they don't have to go on and like wait through the whole credits for some like 30-second thing that isn't going to matter to them. So yeah, so in all honesty, I had watched a interview with Dave Grohl, and Dave Grohl said exactly how this movie was going to be set up. So before the movie even like went the way it went, I immediately already knew how this movie was going to go through a Dave Grohl interview. So I was like, oh, well that kind of ruins it, but like really thinking about it, you can immediately like know where this movie is technically heading because really when looking at it like Dave like has gone on and like been able to play like any number of any of these instruments at some point so he can go on and go solo and be with the Foo Fighters and like we've kind of have seen that through time. So with that said, I'm going to get the heck out of here so I can go on and review something else. uh yeah, the one thing that I forgot about, we did have the one moment where the two Foo Fighter members are like running through the house, and consistently things are getting shifted, and all of a sudden we're seeing these like shadowy figures, these shadowed demons that are kind of throughout this house, and so like we have these guys just kind of running around through this house to forcefully have them fight against Dave. So yeah, so with that said, I apologize for otherwise not being able to have the correct band members. Like, I have listened to quite a few Foo Fighters music upon my time, but like, I'm never good with names. I couldn't even get Dave's name correctly through this part. So really, I apologize if there's anybody who's to go on and be like, hey man, like you didn't say this person's name correctly, or like I was just happy to be able to get a good portion of this movie said, done, whatever. By the end of this, all I could say is this was a great film, and if people are to go on and watch this and like it, wouldn't blame you because it was a really great film. Really enjoyed it. So I'm going to go out of my way to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.